try that. Yep, that works. Anyway, thank you, Michael Bloom, Glenn Carr, and Rod Haney for your contributions to this. You know, you have to be sort of brave or crazy to try and do a subject like this. It's not easy to find this material if you look for it. Most of this came from collections that I've bought over the years, and in some ways you don't know what else to do with it except just hold on to it. I've broken this down, and we'll start here right now, but I broke it down, just so you know in advance, into 3 sections. The first is oddball material stamps. The second is non-stamps or non-postage. The third is postal history. So hopefully there's something here for everyone. So with that, we'll start the presentation. If I can figure out how to do this. Oh, okay, here we go. Great.
Oh, interesting.
So welcome to the ISGC Stamp Chat on oddball items. And we hope that you enjoy this, that there's something here that will catch your fancy. The first slide here is a card that was used by Scott Stamp and Coin. It's on stiff cardstock, and I thought you might like that just because it has the 5-cent Quetzal in color on the front of it, which is unusual and fun to see. This second slide is our bogus or fantasies. They, I believe, were in El Quetzal some years ago and have absolutely no official status whatsoever. They were created by obviously by stamp collectors, but they're sort of fun to see. And I suppose there's more. Glenn Carr sent these to me. That's obviously all he has. And then a similar group of bogus items. Oh, it said 1880s fantasies. They're actually 1950s. And with the overprint on the top of a official, and then the ones on the lower bottom. The ones on the lower left were at one time considered legitimate issues of Guatemala. I've seen those in old stamp collection, stamp album pages, but they're pretty uncommon and sort of fun to see. These stamps were perfined, so that's somewhat distinguished from perforated. Perfined with the word canceled. And these again came from Glenn Carr. I suppose that they put these perfined holes on a whole sheet, and these just sort of happened to fit back together, so sort of fun to see. Again, probably the 1950s era. Now these errors, spurious errors, 1967 to 1977, were the subject of an article by David Lindwall, and I have a reference here to that article. And for those of you who don't know, this became a serious problem, not just for stamp collectors, but for the Guatemalan post office. These things, many of them in any event, came out the back door of the post office. They were issued in limited quantities of some amount, maybe one sheet of 50 stamps. And if, at least up until about 20 or 25 years ago, these were offered. I remember them coming from Jacques Schiff. I don't remember if Sanabria had any of these, but those were the kinds of dealers who would offer these in their auctions. And you'll still see, For example, that red overprinted souvenir sheet offered on eBay, particularly by German dealers. They seem to have acquired a lot of this stuff, and just they're always on eBay, always offered for whatever, $15. The inverted one's a little unusual, but in any event, there was a lot of these. And just to finish that story, eventually the Guatemalan authorities removed quite a few of the senior postal officials in an effort to stop this trade in what they considered to be illegal material coming out of the post office. So this slide is Oddball Items charity stamps, and in the upper left corner is a cover with the Red Cross charity stamp tied to it. It's not an uncommon stamp. You see that fairly often, and fairly often on eBay, affixed to a cover. However, it's more difficult to find those tied to a cover with a cancel, which makes it sort of fun to look for if you. Pardon? The second on the right is a fundraising stamp, and this one, 2 centavo stamp, was for the construction of a road at Esquipulas Cathedral. I have no idea how that worked. I guess you gave them 2 centavos, you got a stamp as evidence, and they paved their road. And then the bottom one is a little more complex, and I tried to translate it and gave up. It was for the support of a religious order. It's dated 1954. So those are not by any means a complete listing of charity stamps. There's a lot of those. These are representative of that. Guatemala's issued Christmas seals, or TB seals, I think starting in the late 1950s. If these are just sort of representative of those, there is a catalog of Christmas seals or TB seals, which are in various philatelic libraries. If you care about these, it lists all of the Guatemala Christmas seals. They are obviously not very popular with collectors. They're sort of truly oddball items as far as stamp collectors are concerned. But one thing I wanted to point out on this is the lower left 1972 issue is printed on glazed paper. And Guatemala used that same identical glazed paper for some of its issues, including the 1971 stamp centenary issue. So that suggests that the government printing office, or one of connected with the government, I don't know if it was Tipografía Nacional or whoever, but was using that paper for both postage and Christmas seals. So we're still in the stamps section. And these are sort of cool things. If you look at them, they were actually meant to mimic routing instructions. And you probably know or should know that up until the late 1890s, most of the foreign mail went through dispatch offices on the Pacific coast of Guatemala. The reason was that getting to the East Coast was a terrible trip. It was real steep hills. It was a swamp, and when you arrived, you were at Livingston, which was basically an unimproved harbor, so that it was much more efficient to go on the West Coast. When you sent a letter to, for example, the United States. It was, you tried to catch, a mailer tried to catch um, the ship that was leaving the West Coast the soonest. And you'll see those routing instructions on the upper left of covers going to and from California to Guatemala. And so this set is pretty cool. It was discovered by a collector in 1921 as the first report of these. I've never seen one on a cover. I'm sure they do. If they are on a cover, they were affixed to the cover long after it was used. But they're a lot of fun to collect. This past week, there was some on eBay that were listed for a start, either buy it now or starting bid of $50 each, which is about $45 too much. But they're hard to find and fun to see. So there's 25 different varieties of them if that's something you're interested in. And the next slide, again, is involved with routing of mail. And this one is the cover itself is dated 1898. And by this time, Puerto Barrios, which isn't that far from Livingston, was open, and particularly due to United Fruits wanting a port on the East Coast that they could use for shipping. And so all of a sudden the mail started being routed via Puerto Barrios. And of course, New Orleans was and remained a U.S. dispatch office for decades. So the typical routing would be via Puerto Barrios and New Orleans. If it was going to Europe, it would go from New Orleans in a mail bag to New York and then on. So these had these labels had no official status. And you see they're in different colors. I've seen dark blue. I don't know what other colors there are, but they're always popular with collectors, I suppose. A cover like this with that affixed to it is $50 to $100, maybe like that. So they're fun, and that was the purpose of these labels. One more oddball stamp item is the postage stamp on this revenue paper. Well, it's not revenue paper, but it's official paper. And in the Paytan and Koban, those areas, for who knows what reason, ran out of revenue stamps. And for a period of about 6 months, they were forced to use some other indication of payment of the revenue fee and use these types of current postage stamps that they exist with this Indian woman issue and also with the Liberty Head stamps. And they're mentioned in Andrew's fiscal handbook if you're ever interested in that kind of thing. Fairly rare. So now we're talking about a group that's non-postal. And the first one I included here was what I think they're referred to as cedula. They are not postal items as such, but they're pretty cool looking. Some of them are printed by American Banknote Company. And the one on the lower left, for example, is a bond coupon, but the one on the upper left then was similar, but overprinted. And so in Quetzaltenango, what was happening was these commercial centers like Quetzaltenango did not have sufficient small denomination coins. So in order to continue their mercantile activities, they were forced to this recourse. And the one on the right, of course, is a pretty cool one. It has a picture on the one side of the I don't know what you call that thing. I suppose it's some kind of dock, but you've probably seen those postcards with that extending out into the Pacific, and that was called a port because it wasn't a port except for that kind of construction out into the ocean. In 1944, a political candidate for president, Adrian Racinos, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, ran for the office of president and lost. And these are somewhat, they aren't rare and people don't collect them, of course, but that's an example of stamps being used for a political campaign. And those Michael Bloom sent that to me. Those are the biggest multiples I've ever seen of those, and variety. So sort of fun. He one of the things that he did was Racinos translated the Popol Vuh, or however that's pronounced, the Mayan history of creation. So he was famous as a scholar. So these are commercial labels that you sometimes see. Usually they're sort of in a collection remnant of stuff that people just left that they didn't know what to do with. In the upper left is a card that's probably 2.5 by 4 inches in size. Has some reproductions of Guatemalan stamps. It's numbered 24, and so possibly it could have been a cigarette card. It could have been a collector card, but something like that. The two stamp images in the upper right were oddball things. Like it says agricultural and industrial exposition. Apparently Guatemala and Salvador put together some kind of an event that are represented by these. The one on the lower right, Belgian chocolate promotional, is tenuously connected to stamp collecting in Guatemalan lately by the 1 centavo Quetzal stamp that's pictured there. The guy on the horse is actually described as a Guatemalan postman. So sort of fun. The one on the lower left is a centenary of a Guatemalan bank, Banco de Occidente, but it's just to give this some philatelic meaning, and if you collect Central American stamps, you'll see a lot of stamps celebrating some bank, and that's on a postal issue, and you might wonder why would they make a note of this bank's centenary or whatever. And the reason is that many of those countries, the issuance of stamps was expensive, and in order to facilitate that, these Central American countries would permit the various businesses to pay for an issue of stamps. And so a lot of, like, for example, Salvador, a lot of these countries have rotary issues or issues celebrating some bank. And that's where that came from. This issue was not official, of course. This is a souvenir of the ISGC meeting at WestPEX in 2014, and an attractive item was made by a friend of mine here in Denver who is a retired union printer. He's real proud of having been in the union, and he likes putting these kinds of things together. But this has everything. It has ambulante markings. It has toppers, triangles. It has in the upper right, a overprinted 15 peso Guatemalan stamp that says ISGC WestPEX 2014. Pretty fun item. So all ISGC members got one of these at that meeting. So now we'll move into postal history, which, forgive me, I collect postal history, so it's entirely possible that it will be weighted in that direction. The first item here is a envelope which was used by President Barrios. It had his official seal. I have an example of the seal itself on the right. And you'll remember that Barrios got a wild notion that the Central American Federation should be restarted, and he did. He proclaimed that federation and named himself the president. And when other Central American countries were surprised, he formed an army and marched it into Salvador, where he was killed in 1885. So in Guatemala, there was a lot of this postal stationery, if you will, left that had his seal on it. So they overprinted it, Direction General de Correos, Guatemala. And they used it for notification purposes, something they did all the way through into the 30s. That's sort of a fun item. Oops, oh, nuts. So this one is a cover in the upper left from Charcoal, Russia, from a stamp collector named Brochley, or however that's pronounced, addressed to Carlos Galuser. It arrived, it was back stamped in Guatemala City on June 13, 1893. And then the lower right cover, our postcard, is from Galuser, addressed back to Charcoal, Russia, and canceled June 16, 3 days after it arrived. And I thought that's a pretty oddball combination. I mean, that either one of those things survived is surprising, and to have those connected that way is fun. This postcard has what is called cross writing. I cannot imagine how they read this. I've tried to figure out what those words are, but you'll see that they first wrote it horizontally, and then they tilted it sideways, and then cross wrote over it. And you see these occasionally. Apparently that was a way to save 3 centavos. You didn't need a second postcard. You just doubled the writing area by cross writing on the card itself. In 1875, Guatemala issued a large quantity of postal stationery and postal cards. And one reason the mint cards and stationery to this day have almost zero value is that the remainders of these were sold by the government to stamp dealers to raise some revenue for Guatemala. Henry Coleman was at Scott's Stamp and Coin Company was one of the purchasers. And you'll see here the use which a lot of those remaindered postal stationery items were used for. You see these occasionally. They're in all different kinds of overprints by these dealers. A lot of them will have, oh, you can see on that one in the upper right, you can see there were stamps in the three corners that have been removed. So they would do that as a promotional tool using Guatemalan postal items. This is an oddball item. In 1972, the Olympic overprinted souvenir sheets had become damaged. And I think that issue was released in 1971. In any event, they retrieved these out of storage. And then in the post office, the postal clerks would trim the stamps out of the damaged sheets with pinking shears and apply the stamps to outgoing mail. And you can see at least on the right edge of the right stamp that it was cut with a pinking shears. One strange thing. This slide shows a receipt for payment of bulk mailing fees. And so the way this would work is if you were a bulk mailer, you would bring your mail to the post office where the postage would be calculated and then noted on this receipt. So in this case, it was 69 centavos, and upon payment, the mailer would receive this receipt. Now this Jaime Marquardt knows a lot more about these than I do. This is his specialty. But what happened with, you probably know the story, when in 1951, this issue was printed, this particular sheet, for whatever reason, and that's debated, but showed on the right, the 5 centavo stamp, a map of Guatemala, including British Honduras or Belize. And when it was printed, it actually had the name of British Honduras on the map. And you know that Guatemala has, I don't know if they still are, but for 100 years claimed that British Honduras or Belize was actually part of Guatemala, and they were constantly trying to assert that claim. So what happened was these error, if you will, souvenir sheets were trimmed down so that the 5 centavo error stamp was removed and then used in the post office as postage, which in this case was part of a registered cover, and they applied this remnant of a souvenir sheet to the reverse in payment of the registry fee and postage. So this cover came from Rod Haney, and he liked this because you'll see the reverse of the cover has a part of a Guatemalan cigar revenue stamp used to seal the cover, which is an unusual use and sort of fun to see. This slide shows a baggage tag, and it was mailed from the Palace Hotel, and I would guess it was used to mail some kind of a package, well, maybe a suitcase for that matter. And you'll see that the weight was 14.850 kilos. And that Fardo postal cancel is quite rare. Usually package Fardo or package is, the wrapping is destroyed and thrown away. So there are very few Fardo's cancels. This had a third one, Quetzal stamp in the lower right of the bottom image removed, but it's still fun to see that high value franking. And this slide will conclude my presentation. But again, this is one of those oddball things. You'll see that this cover itself was registered, and the registration number was 00319, and the address 6 Avenida Sur Norte 4. And corresponding to that is the advice of receipt form, which was sent back to the sender upon delivery of the registered item. So that's, I think, odd. How often do you suppose you'll find the registered letter and the advice of receipt, which obviously wound up in two different places? So that's the end of this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.